Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to our Talking Transition podcast brought to you by OGCI, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. We're looking to provide an authentic look at how OGCI works and what the energy transition really means. What are the hard questions? What are the messy issues? And what are the challenges and opportunities that this brings? Today, we're going to talk about stakeholder engagement. And we're going to talk about it with four lenses: what it is, why it's important. I'll mention who we're talking with, which will be a gentleman named Julian I'll introduce in a moment, and how we work with them. And the how is going to be the bulk of the broadcast. So today, OGCI published a table of joint projects that we're doing with stakeholders that cover everything from tracking flaring of methane with satellites to capturing CO2 on deep sea tankers and improving how we detect and quantify methane emissions around the world. Why are we doing this? Well, stakeholder engagement is one of the pillars of what OGCI does. Tackling climate change is a huge challenge. It needs all hands on board. Nobody is going to be able to do it alone. It is the true story of the power of collaboration. And it requires what Cristina Figueres calls radical collaboration. Who I'm going to be talking with? I'm going to be talking with my colleague, Julian Perez. Julian is the Vice President for Strategy and Policy at OGCI Climate Investments. And he's been with the organization really since it was just a concept. He was there at the launch of it. Julian has been working in the climate change and sustainable development market for over 15 years and has also worked in industry at Total and in advisory and consulting services. He brings enormous breadth of expertise, and at any time, if you have a question what's going on at OGCI, he's the one I always turn to. So, Julian, good morning.
Hello, Suzanne. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Julian, where are you right now? You're in Paris?
Yes, at home in Paris, like for almost a year now, as most of us, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm at home in Boston, just outside of Boston. It's been 10 months. I'm a little bit stir crazy. Who ever thought I would miss traveling?
Yes, indeed. I think that's the point. We went from an extreme to the other. So it's just that now we have to move to the middle ground. I hope that's going to be the case in the next few months.
Yes, me too. So I know, Julian, that stakeholder engagement is one of those topics you're passionate about. But let's really start at the beginning. Who, from your perspective, who is a stakeholder? How do we define them?
Well, as the oil and gas industry and the energy industry as a whole interact with, I would say, every segment of the economy. So, contrary to other sector, the energy industry, I think, has a huge list of stakeholders. So, when you take from the scientific perspective, and of course the university are very important stakeholder from an OGCI perspective, I mean, and we'll tackle that later on, I guess. But that's one of the critical one. NGOs, obviously, extremely important as well, considering that we provide a lot of energy, but also we represent a major contribution of the climate footprint.
Can you just define, just so everybody knows, what is an NGO?
Well, an NGO is a non-governmental organization. So basically, it's a group of, I would say, passionate people with depth of knowledge in one topic that engage with private and public players to move the needle on one topic. So it's what we call as well sometimes civil society, because they represent the civil society.
Got it. Okay, good. Thank you. So we talked about research, we talked about NGO.
Yeah, research and the NGO, governments, obviously, business partner, value chain players, all of the people that interact with your business but are not part of the core of your business, to make it short.
And who would be a value chain player? What does that mean?
Well, the value chain player are the customer, the provider of services of goods to our business. So again, anybody who interacts and allow us to do the business, basically. So yeah.
Got it. So it's research, NGOs, government, value chain. Should we add finance to that list?
Yes, absolutely, you're right. In the investor perspective is of utmost importance, particularly for, I would say, from our member companies' eyes, more than from the OGCI, because as OGCI we're just a coalition, so we don't interact directly with their investors. But indeed, you're right. For our member, it's very important.
Great, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about why stakeholder engagement's key to OGCI. So I've always viewed it as one of those great wary places where we can leverage the collective actions of our 12 members and also ensure that we, stay humble. We understand the value of other perspectives. But what's your view on what the value is?
Well, I think you're right, Susan. What you've described is very accurate, and also I liked the introduction that you made and reminding us that nobody can do that alone. So whatever is the footprint that you bring to the climate challenge, you will not solve it alone. And it would be fool to think that one company or one government can bring the silver bullet that will completely solve this equation. Climate challenge is an extremely complex issue. It has implication at every, again, segment of the economy. And as a global challenge, it requires a global answer. So as we can't do everything on our own, we need collaboration with every type of stakeholder that we can engage with to accelerate the transformation of the energy sector and bring low carbon solution at the scale of the Paris Agreement.
Just in terms of that last answer, are the other players in the energy sector, are those also stakeholders? Because we didn't touch on those in the first answer.
Yes, it's always a question of perspective, but it's true that I approach the stakeholder angle from an oil and gas industry. But if you ask me the question, who are the stakeholders from OGCI perspective? So at the boundary of OGCI, of course, all the companies who are not member of OGCI can be considered as stakeholders. So as the association that are working aside of OGCI and looking in the same direction as us are also very important stakeholder to us.
Got it. All right. Well, that makes sense. In terms of what we do and what we don't, OGCI itself is, well, you know better than I, it's actually, the organization itself is relatively small, although our 12 members are rather large. But given those restraints of the size, how do we actually work with stakeholders most effectively? What would be a couple examples that you see
Yeah,
of where we work?
Yeah, I can give you some recent one and some that come on top of my head. So OGCI is about practical action. So when we engage with stakeholders, it's the same thing as when we work with our member companies to move toward a net zero world. So it's about practical action, and again, when we translate that into stakeholder engagement example that go through the methane science studies, for instance, this is a long-term partnership that we launched back in 2017 with EDF and the United Nations Environmental Program. And the idea is that we run a series of measurement campaign across a certain number of assets to test and try some technology, but also to address, what are the real methane emissions. And so to do the partnership that is built, basically, there is a financial sponsorship from OGCI, but more importantly, we open access as well to our site and facility, and we provide some technical knowledge to the debate, etc. So this is the one example. Another one is a partnership that we've launched last year with the World Bank and the Payne Institute. And here, similarly as for the methane science studies, this is a dual financial and technical partnership for us. And basically, we're sponsoring a program that is launched by a university, so the Payne Institute, who is capturing satellite information and will store this information into a publicly available web page. And that's going to translate the satellite image into a quantity of gas that is flared. So again, there is a lot of algorithm, a lot of research behind that, and you need to provide some technical expertise in addition to the financial support. Maybe one last example that I could share is the Global Methane Alliance, where here we are more engaging policymaker, and we provide knowledge sharing and technical support to countries for them to include methane reduction targets from the oil and gas sector in their revised national climate strategy. So yeah, that's just 3 examples, but we have dozens like this.
Julian, my sense here is that these are complicated deals to do. That it's just
Yes.
you've been at OGCI literally since it was a concept before it was even really launched. How long does it take to make, you mentioned 3 deals, Methane Science with EDF, the Payne Institute, World Bank, the Global Satellite thing, and the Global Methane Alliance. How long does it take to actually make this happen? And I'm bringing this up because all we hear with climate issues is how urgent it is and how pressed we have to be.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
How
No,
do we
it's
reconcile that with how long it takes for this stuff to happen?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Susan. I think it's a trade-off between the time to implement that and the impact that you think it can have, and that's always the judgment that we try to evaluate when we create such a partnership. So the time it takes, well, it's I think as soon as you have the concept, and that it's okay for the 2 partners. Then rolling out, I would say, all the administrative piece, etc., is relatively smooth and easy because we have a trusted relationship now with most of those stakeholders. Like we have a number of partnership with the UN, with the World Bank. We have a very long relationship, etc. So that can be expedited relatively quickly. But the concept is important because we have to identify where there is a gap in the science, in the markets, to scale up, etc. So where there is something that is missing, and is OGCI the good organization to bring the value add, and who could be the right partner? And once you have made those 3 components of the equation all together, and you look that yes, it can work, then you can expedite that. And what I was saying before, like the trade-off between the time to implement and the impact it can have, is very important because we don't want to do something that is already existing, of course, but we don't want either to spend hours and hours and maybe months or years on a partnership that would not deliver something that is meaningful in terms of impact. So all the three previous one are very, very I think will bring a lot, and the other that we've joined hopefully will as well.
So, Julian, let's talk about impact for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Because impact it is what really drives us. It's what gets us up in the morning to fight every day. How are you looking at impact? How do you measure it? What's your scale for figuring this stuff out? Because I know it's something all of us have to think through every day, right? Our scarcest resources are time, and our availability to do this. So figuring out what we do is going to have the biggest impact with stakeholders. It just seems to be really a pivotal question.
Yes. Well, first of all, one thing that's struck me, generally speaking, because as you said, we are a small organization like OGCI. The staff of OGCI and the structure of OGCI is relatively small, particularly compared to our member companies. What strikes me is that when we bring a new concept back to them, because we've discussed that with one of our stakeholder and we've made sure that just around the table or a phone call. What strikes me is that when it raises an interest for the 12 member companies, then I think that we have hidden something that makes sense because they are the experts. They navigate in these worlds for decades. They have a lot of people, and so I know that there's going to be something here. I know that there's going to be an impact, and that we were on the right track when we developed the concept, and then when we're going to roll it out. How we measure the impact? Well, of course, there is I would say the usual KPI in terms of tons of greenhouse gas emissions that we would have allowed to avoid or that we have reduced. So we do that for our targets, for instance. That's relatively easy. When it comes to when we're going to disclose, for instance, or when we're going to help to disclose, I would say, the quantity of gas that is flared around the world, thanks to the program that is run by the World Bank and the Payne Institute. What will be the impact? Frankly speaking, I don't know, but I know that there will gonna be because some countries don't have access to this level of information and cannot make any policy in place, for instance. When they're going to have that level of information, they're going to realize that there is a lot of saving potential. And so it's not naming and shaming, that's not the objective, but it's just to make the science sufficiently progressing at a sufficient level that all the stakeholders can act, and particularly the policymaker. So yeah, I guess that you can feel as well the scale of the impact if you want. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like going back to basics. I mean, my background is as a banker, and
Nobody's perfect.
we always had that. That's right. You can forgive me for that. Uh, but it's one of those classic things, right? You can't manage what you can't measure. And as
Absolutely.
long as you don't have the information and you don't have transparency, it's really hard to make the right decisions to manage something. And opaque markets are never efficient. They just aren't.
Yeah.
So good. All right. So I'm going to ask. We've talked about how many gazillion possible stakeholders there are in all the different sectors for it. We've given some really interesting examples of high impact working with the stakeholders and how you pick those. So, given all the full range of stakeholders with whom we could engage, can you talk about different kinds of examples? You talked through the three earlier, but are there other ways that we engage with stakeholders that we should be talking about here?
Yes, thanks, Susan. You're right. Actually, I focused mainly the three example I gave you were around methane, which probably is a bias that I have because that's one of the main focus that we have since the first hour of OGCI. If I give you other examples, so when you asked me to list the stakeholder, I mentioned, for instance, the value chain player. We have, for instance, launched an in-depth assessment with a vessel provider, so name is Stena Bulk, and we work with them to assess what could be the technology available on various type of vessel to capture the CO2 emission. And so to allow very quickly, without changing completely the existing fleet, to plug in some technology to allow this carbon capture to work. So of course it looks like a little bit a crazy project, but actually there is some technology available. And engaging with a vessel provider, they can provide us the details and the technical details of their vessel, and we can provide the knowledge on carbon capture. And by this collaboration, actually, we start to identify some areas that where potentially then could be followed up by either a collaboration between our member companies directly with this vessel provider, and some of them will be interested, or as OGCI as a coalition, maybe we'll push, a pilot around that. So that's going to be the next stage. But at this stage, that's one extra type of action that we do. Another one that I could share with you very quickly is that we have signed up with the Clean Energy Ministerial. So the Clean Energy Ministerial is a group of Ministry of Energy and Environment, gathering, I think, something like 80 countries. And we've signed up an agreement with them on CCUS. And here again, we scale up the potential for CCUS policy and CCUS hubs around the world thanks to this partnership. So yeah, just two extra examples that are outside of methane and with different type of stakeholder.
Do we ever do anything simple with stakeholders? All right. That's a self-evident question. Let me back up on that one. It's also disingenuous because I sort of know the answer to that one, which is yes, right?
If it's simple, it's already done, so we wouldn't be additional. That's one.
Right. Fair enough. But we do, for example, sometimes it seems to me that what we work with stakeholders is just to do a reality check, to get a different perspective, because everybody can be in a bubble, right? Everybody can look at perspectives. And we bring 12 of the world's biggest oil and gas companies around the table. But to be perfectly honest, they're all in the same industry. They will phrase and look at questions with a similar perspective. So I find some of the biggest value from stakeholder engagement being that they have a different view. They question what we're doing, and they light a fire under us, and they criticize things, and they say, well, what about this and what about that? It just seems that difference of perspective also has real value in terms of where we do action, where we evaluate impact, where our time, effort, resources best spent.
Yeah, you're totally right, Suzanne. It's true that I focused on the partnership, but this what we call or what I call on my side stakeholder dialogue is absolutely essential. So we have this like long-term relationship with a number of our stakeholders who bring us some different perspective, and clearly accelerate our agenda. We've done, for instance, this year a work with a group of students coming from Student Energy, who provided this kind of insight to us, and that was extremely interesting. And hopefully, we're going to continue this relationship with them, but as well as with other type of stakeholders. So, the one I mentioned, for instance, earlier, like the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, we have some like solid partnership with them. But we also have a very long-term relationship. Same for EDF. Like we engage on a regular basis, and we listen to them, and we hear what are their concerns and how we can try to adapt ourselves and get their perspective into our day-to-day work. So yeah, just maybe one last example that come on top of my head now. One topic that we are engaging on within OGCI, it's the most recent topic I would say, is on natural climate solution. And of course here you could expect, well, you don't expect necessarily the oil and gas industry to play a role first, and
No.
and the maturity level of our member companies is relatively wide because not all of them have already engaged, etc. And so here, the perspective of the stakeholder is absolutely essential because we learn from them. And that's why we joined, for instance, the Natural Climate Solution Alliance from the Nature Conservancy and WPCSD. And this is really very important for us.
Good. All right. Well, that's reassuring. It's not all unbelievably complicated multi-year transactions. My bet also is that that dialogue is probably a first step for many of those other relationships. So, Julian, in 2019, which is the year I joined this organization, we published a statement about responsible, transparent stakeholder engagement. I wasn't here at the time because I'm sure it went through a gazillion drafts and was iterated many times. But why was it important for OGCI to publish that? And can you describe what it says?
Yes, well, it's important for us to make sure that that there's OGCI, the coalition of player, and then there is the member companies, and all of that is in different lists from time to time using the terminology of GCI. So for us, it was important as a coalition first, but also making sure that our member companies, and for the member companies' perspective, it was the same. I mean, they wanted to make sure that the coalition and their peers were supporting the stakeholder engagement, transparency that we wanted to have. It's important for us to make clear that we don't say one thing in public and another thing in private. And that's why we publish also our advocacy principle, for instance, a few months ago. We want to be extremely transparent on that. And that's, I hope, a good example on the fact that we're not paying to be, to stay aside of the equation. We want to engage, and we want that to be made in a transparent manner. And yeah, just demonstrate that we do what we say and we say what we do, in short.
Good. That's short and sweet. So I think these are really interesting questions. For 2021, what's your dream list? What is success? Success isn't the right term. But if we were to manage these and work with our stakeholders most effectively, what are the 2 or 3 things that you'd love to see accomplished during the course of this year? And this year is a special year, right? We've got COP26 coming up. We have a groundswell of commitments around net zero. And at the same time, we're working with an industry that is facing both COVID-19, low oil prices, and an economy that is uncertain in its outlook. That feels like a graciously ambiguous way to say it. So in that context, what do we think is going to be most important about stakeholder engagement coming up?
Well, I think you captured it. For me, what has really struck me for the past 12 or 18 months, I would say, is that the world has clearly shifted from a shy support to Paris Agreement toward a clear acceleration to deliver a net zero economy by 2050. This is a very big switch. And that has been done in a year where all countries and every people we're facing the pandemic and the related crisis that we still all face. And I think actually what really inspired me is that truly believe that this crisis actually had just served as a catalyst of the deep change that were anyway happening in the society. And so the consumer really wants things to change. And so as energy player, our member companies, as you say, are also facing like multiple dilemma. The energy is responsible of, as I said, two-thirds, roughly speaking, of the climate footprint, and the oil and gas industry is part of this two-thirds. But at the same time, we are asked to provide an affordable energy, reliable everywhere in the world, and at a fair price, but also to reduce the climate footprint of it and to invest into the new technology for that to happen. So this is something that it's a complex combination, and this is not again something that we can do alone. So collaboration with value chain and our consumer in a transparent, practical, and pragmatic way is what we need. And I think my second wish, if I may, is that, of course, I mean, we are not fool. We know that the oil and gas industry is not always welcome on the climate table, particularly by some players, and for good or bad reason. What I would like is to have a very positive engagement with them. The world, unfortunately, cannot afford anymore to waste time in debate and controversy. Time is now to act and track our success on every single ton of greenhouse gas emission we'll manage to abate. It's not anymore a question of debate, I would say. And so I truly hope that we'll be able to reinforce some partnership as a coalition and through our individual member with all of these players.
Julian, thank you. I'm going to switch to asking a couple of questions about you. Julian, you've been here really since this was probably a PowerPoint deck and a concept before it was announced at the COP talks in Paris, the formally announced. And you're still here. And this is an industry that moves it moves slowly, right? It is a huge industry with huge amounts of history and infrastructure, stakeholders and shareholders. So why are you still here? What do you see as the difference? What gets you up in the morning and causes you to spend the 18-hour days that I know you spend on this with two little kids, by the way?
Oh, three little kids. Yeah.
Three. Oh my
Three,
gosh.
yes. It makes it a little bit more challenging. No, but thanks, Susan. It's a personal question, but I'm gonna be very honest here. I think I like your question. So first of all, I think as I mentioned earlier, when you work in the sustainable development or climate change since, as for me, like more than 15 years again, you interact with a lot of people that are passionate by the topic, that are very engaged, etc. And when you told them, well, I think where we have the impact is on, the oil and gas industry or the cement industry or the steel industry, some of them don't really believe that you're serious and that you're really engaged and that I don't know why, but anyway, when you're turned to this domain, you realize that actually the size of the issue is where you can make the impact. So not working with the oil and gas industry for me would be a nonsense if I wanted to really have an impact. And I think I've probably said 20 times the word impact already since the beginning of this interview. So it's so important.
It bears repeating. It's good.
Yes. So aiming to have an impact and refusing to work with the oil and gas industry, for me, it's an absolute nonsense. So it's very important to me to work with those players. And as you say, OGCI at the very beginning, actually, it was a PowerPoint deck. You're right. It was just a phone number, a few people on the mailing list that really didn't know why they were put on this mailing list, and some email exchanged. And today, as you know, we're incorporated. We have brilliant people like you, and we have a website, we have podcast, and we have all of that. And more importantly, we have a fund as well, who is investing in very high impact technology. And we engage. We have a number of stakeholder relationship, as you say. So, and we did that in a few years. And why we do that? I mean, why did it grow like this? It's because I think, and I hope that we continue to bring a unique value proposition, a unique impact through OGCI, through the collaboration, through the engagement that we have. And as we said at the beginning, I mean, some segment of the low carbon value chain cannot be moved alone by none of our member, as big as they are. It's too risky. It needs, a very complex level of knowledge, international footprint, etc. And some of them cannot bring all this set of competencies. And this is where collaboration play a key role. And again, collaboration with group of players that have potential huge impact is what motivates me. So yeah.
That's good. That's good. All right. Well, Julian, I have the feeling I'll be, as I often do, talking to you many times during the course of today as we are in touch. But thank you. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you for sharing your insights.
Thanks, Susan.
So just to close this podcast this morning, for anyone who's interested in more details around the programs that Julian just described, and actually a pretty comprehensive list of the more material engagement we have with stakeholders in the projects, please visit our site. We're publishing a list of those, and they'll be available if you go to the world's longest website name, www.oilandgasclimateinitiative.com. And you'll be able to see those, review those, and find out a whole lot more information about the OGCI and especially about OGCI Climate Investments, our $1 billion+ fund that's focused on ventures and projects and catalyzing changes in those ecosystems. We'll also be publishing shortly information about our work in natural climate solutions, so you can look for that there. And for broad information about what we're doing, please follow us either on Twitter or on LinkedIn, looking up again, Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. Our upcoming podcasts are going to be talking about methane science studies. We've just published a group of 6 of them, and we'll be having a conversation with the chief scientist at EDF, and we'll be having a conversation about natural climate solutions around and what we're doing in that area with one of the leaders in that area in Petrobras. Thank you very much for your time. Please stay safe. And again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.